I took my son's car, not borrowed, took. The keys were sitting on my hall table where he'd left them 20 minutes earlier, still warm from his pocket, next to the envelope with my own car's title signed over to some stranger in Pittsburgh for $4,000. $4,000 for a car I'd driven for 12 years, a car that knew every road in this county, that still had Robert's sunglasses in the glove box and my emergency lipstick in the center console. "Mom, you understand why I did this, right?" David had said, standing in my kitchen, drinking my coffee from the mug that used to be his father's. "You're 74. Last week you couldn't remember where you parked at the grocery store." I had remembered perfectly well, 3rd row, near the cart return, same spot I always used, but I'd let him think otherwise because it was easier than arguing. That was the first mistake, the long chain of letting things be easier. "It's not safe," he'd continued, and I'd watched him set the mug down without rinsing it, leaving a ring on my clean counter. Linda and I talked about it. "You should have been part of the conversation, but you would have just fought us on it." Linda, his wife, who had never once asked me how I was doing after Robert died, but who had very specific opinions about whether I should keep using my wedding china or donate it to Goodwill. "The money's in your account," David said, pulling on his jacket, the expensive one, camel-coloured wool, the kind Robert never would have spent money on. "I took care of everything. Guy's coming to pick it up this afternoon." He'd kissed my cheek, called me Mama like he used to when he was small and skinned his knee. Told me he'd call tomorrow to check in, then he'd left. I stood in my kitchen for a long time after the door closed, looking at the coffee ring. At the envelope with the title, at the keys to his brand new SUV sitting there on my table like an accusation. Something in my chest felt very tight, the way it had felt 8 years ago when the nurse told me Robert's heart had stopped and there was nothing more they could do. That same airless quality, that same sense of the world reorganizing itself around an absence. But this time, I wasn't waiting for someone to tell me it would be okay. I picked up the keys. They were heavier than I expected, attached to some kind of leather fob with his initials embossed in gold. D.M. David Marcus, named after Robert's father, who had been a kind man, who had taught his grandson to fish and to shake hands firmly and to keep his word. I wondered what Marcus would think, seeing his name attached to this. The SUV was parked in my driveway, blocking my empty garage. Glossy black, something German, with a name I couldn't pronounce. The kind of car that looked like it cost more than my first house. I got in. The seat was leather, heated, already programmed to someone else's preferences. The dashboard lit up like a cockpit. There were buttons I didn't understand, screens showing navigation to addresses I'd never been. I adjusted the mirrors, started the engine. Backed out of my driveway, David called when I was 3 blocks away. I watched his name light up the screen. Somehow his phone was connected to the car's system, his contacts, his music, his whole digital life integrated into this machine. I didn't answer. The phone rang 4 times, went to voicemail, immediately started ringing again. I turned the radio on instead, found a station playing old country, Patsy Cline singing about falling to pieces, and I drove. The SUV handled differently than my car, heavier, higher off the ground. The steering was too sensitive, the brakes too soft, but I figured it out. I'd been driving for 56 years. I'd learned on my father's pickup truck, the one with the stick shift that ground every time you missed 3rd gear. I'd driven through ice storms and summer cloudbursts and rush hour traffic in cities David had never even visited. I could handle this. I drove to the diner on Route 38, the one that had been there since before David was born, where Robert and I used to stop for pie on Sunday afternoons. The parking lot was half empty. It was Tuesday, nearly 3 in the afternoon, the dead zone between lunch and dinner. I pulled into a spot in the back, turned off the engine, and sat there in the sudden silence. My hands were shaking, not from fear, from something else, something that felt like the opposite of the tightness in my chest, like breathing after being underwater too long. The phone was ringing again. 17 missed calls now, according to the screen. Text messages piling up. I could see the previews. "Mum, this isn't funny. Where are you? I'm calling the police. You're not thinking clearly." I got out of the car, locked it with the button on the key fob, heard it beep twice, watched the lights flash, and walked into the diner. Marjorie was behind the counter, same as she'd been for 30 years. She looked up when the bell chimed, smiled that automatic waitress smile, then really looked and the smile changed, became real. "Helen, haven't seen you in months. You doing okay?" "I'm fine," I said, and realized as I said it that it might actually be true. "Can I get a coffee and a slice of that lemon meringue if you've got it? For you? Always." I sat in the booth by the window, the one where Robert always insisted we sit, because he liked watching the cars go by, and I drank my coffee and ate my pie. Outside, the sun was starting to lower, stretching shadows across the parking lot. The black SUV sat there, looking sleek and expensive and completely out of place, and I thought about David's face when he realized what I'd done. I thought about the coffee ring on my counter, the way he'd said, "You would have just fought us on it," as if my opinion on selling my own property was an inconvenience to be managed. The way he'd kissed my cheek and called me Mama and taken my car. I finished my pie, ordered another coffee. Let Marjorie refill it twice while I sat there watching the light change, watching my phone light up and go dark and light up again with David's increasingly frantic messages. And when I finally drove home, I did it slowly, carefully, obeying every speed limit and stop sign, taking the long way through the neighborhoods where the old trees made tunnels of shade, and the houses all had front porches where people used to sit in the evenings, back when people did such things. The garage was still empty when I pulled in. My car, the one with Robert's sunglasses and my emergency lipstick, was somewhere in Pittsburgh by now, or maybe already on its way to wherever David had arranged for it to go, gone. But the SUV fit in my garage just fine. I went inside, made myself a cup of tea, and sat down at my kitchen table with a fresh piece of paper and a pen. At the top, I wrote, "Things that are mine." The list took 3 hours, not because there was so much to write. The physical possessions fit on a single page, but because each item required me to stop and remember when it had stopped being mine in practice, even though it had always been mine in name. The house, mine, bought with Robert's life insurance and my own savings from 40 years teaching elementary school. But David had a key, had always had a key, which was normal, which was what you did for your children. Except he used it to let himself in without knocking, to go through my mail, to check my refrigerator and make comments about expired yogurt. The bank accounts, mine, filled with Robert's pension and my social security and the small inheritance from my mother. But David's name was on them too, added 5 years ago when I'd had that gallbladder surgery. And he'd convinced me it was just practical in case something happened. He hadn't used it to steal. Nothing so crude as that. Just suggestions. Reminders about CDs that were maturing. Advice about moving money into better investments. Opinions about whether I really needed to donate to the public library's building fund. The wedding china. Mine, packed in boxes in the basement. But Linda had asked to borrow it for Thanksgiving 2 years ago and never returned it. "You're not using it," David had said when I asked about it. "Linda's family comes to their house. You could come too, you know, if you wanted." If I wanted, as though the issue was my preference, not the fact that Linda seated me at the kids' table last year and served me the same chicken nuggets she gave her 8-year-old. I sat there at my kitchen table, looking at my list, and something occurred to me, something obvious, something I should have thought of years ago. I got up, went to my office, Robert's office really, though I'd been using it since he died, and pulled out the filing cabinet. Financial records. I kept everything organised by year because Robert had always kept everything and I'd continued the habit. Tax returns, bank statements, investment summaries. I started with last year. There it was, in March, a cheque to David for $8,000. Help with Rachel's college tuition I'd written in my register. June, $3,500. New roof emergency. October, $12,000. Investment opportunity, David's business expansion. I pulled the previous year, $15,000 in April, $6,000 in August, $4,500 in November, the year before that, the year before that. I stopped counting after I reached 80,000 because my hands were shaking again. Not with anger this time, but with something closer to vertigo, the feeling of looking down and realizing you're standing at the edge of a cliff you didn't know was there. $80,000 in 5 years. And that wasn't counting the smaller things, the grocery runs where I paid because I was going anyway, the car insurance I'd covered temporarily that he'd never taken back over, the phone bill, the streaming services, the Amazon account he used with my credit card because it's easier than setting up his own. I thought about the envelope on my table with the title to my car, $4,000. For a car I'd bought with my own money, maintained with my own money, driven for my own purposes. He'd taken my car and sold it and given me $4,000 and acted like he was doing me a favor. The phone rang. Not David this time. His number had stopped appearing after call number 42 about an hour ago. This was Linda. I watched it ring, watched it go to voicemail, listened to the message. Mom, Helen, I don't know what's going on with you, but David is really upset. He says you took his car? That doesn't sound like you. You've always been so reasonable about these things. I'm sure this is just a misunderstanding. Call us back, okay? We just want to make sure you're all right. Reasonable. That word landed in my chest like a stone. I'd been reasonable for 8 years. Reasonable when David suggested I didn't need to travel anymore because what if something happened? Reasonable when he said maybe I should think about cutting back on driving, on volunteering, on the book club I'd been part of for 30 years. Reasonable when Linda made comments about my clothes, my hair, my outdated kitchen that was apparently an embarrassment when their friends came over. I'd been so reasonable, I'd disappeared. The sun had set while I was going through the files. The kitchen was dark except for the papers spread across the table, white rectangles in the dim light from the hallway. I gathered them up, put them in order, slipped them into a manila folder. Evidence. That's what Harold would call it. Harold Morrison, my lawyer, Robert's old golf buddy, who'd drawn up our wills and handled the estate and sent me a card every year on Robert's birthday. I'd need to call him, but not tonight. Tonight I made myself dinner, a proper dinner, not the frozen meals David insisted were easier for me. I made pasta carbonara, Robert's favourite, the one with actual eggs and real parmesan that you grate yourself. And I ate it at the table with cloth napkins and the silver candlesticks that had been my grandmother's. I didn't answer when David called again at 8 or at 9 or at 10:30 just before I went to bed. I slept better than I had in months. In the morning I made coffee and sat at my table and looked at the folder of bank records, at my list of things that were mine, at the key fob for the black SUV sitting on my counter. Then I got dressed. Not the elastic waist pants David thought were more practical, but the wool trousers I used to wear to parent-teacher conferences, the ones that still fit, the ones that made me feel like someone who made decisions. I put on lipstick, brushed my hair properly, found my mother's pearl earrings in the jewellery box where they'd been sitting for 3 years, because when would you wear them? I wore them to the bank. It was a Wednesday, mid-morning, and the bank was quiet. I knew the manager, Patricia Chen. She'd gone to the same high school as David, a few years behind him. She came out of her office when the teller called her, professional smile in place, and it shifted just slightly when she saw me. "Mrs. Morrison, it's good to see you. How can I help you today?" I sat down in her office, in the chair across from her desk, and I put my folder on the surface between us. "I need to remove someone from my accounts," I said. Patricia's smile didn't change, but something in her eyes did. "Of course. Which accounts are we talking about?" "All of them." There was a small pause. "And who would you like to remove?" "My son, David Morrison." Another pause, longer this time. Patricia folded her hands on her desk. "Mrs. Morrison, can I ask, has something happened? If there's a family situation—" "Nothing's happened," I said. And then, because that wasn't quite true, "Nothing's happened that hasn't been happening for years. These are my accounts. I opened them. The money in them is mine. I would like my son's name removed from all of them, today if possible." Patricia looked at me for a long moment. She was younger than David by maybe 5 years, probably in her late 40s. She had that careful expression people get when they're trying to figure out if they're talking to someone competent or someone who needs to be managed. I met her eyes and waited. "Of course," Patricia said finally. "I'll need you to sign some forms. It may take a few hours to process everything." "That's fine. I'll wait." It took 3 hours. 3 hours of paperwork, of signatures, of Patricia gently explaining things I already understood, probably watching to see if I was confused, if I hesitated, if I gave any sign that David's narrative, that I was declining, that I couldn't be trusted with my own affairs, had any basis in reality. I signed everything clearly, answered every question, declined the offer to have someone call David to let him know about these changes. "He'll know soon enough," I said. When it was done, Patricia walked me out personally. At the door, she paused. "Mrs. Morrison, can I say something off the record?" I nodded. I watched my own mother go through something similar with my brother. She waited until she was 86 to do what you're doing now. I admire you for not waiting that long. She shook my hand. I went home. The SUV was still in my garage. I'd left it there on purpose, parked exactly where my car used to sit. A physical fact that David would have to confront when he finally worked up the courage to come here in person instead of calling. I made myself lunch. Tuna salad on toast, the way I liked it, with extra pickles and no lettuce. Because I'd never actually liked lettuce in tuna salad, Robert had, so I'd made it that way for 47 years. And then David had assumed it was my preference too. Small things. So many small things I'd let go of without even noticing. While I ate, I wrote a letter to Harold Morrison. Dear Harold, I need to make some changes to my will. It's been 8 years since Robert died, and I think it's time to revisit our arrangements. Could you fit me in sometime next week? Best regards, Helen. Short, professional. Not explaining anything, because I shouldn't have to explain why I wanted to update my own will. I put it in an envelope, addressed it, stamped it, and walked it to the mailbox at the end of my street. It was a beautiful day, early October. The kind where the air feels like cool water and the light comes through the trees at angles that make everything look painted. I thought about my car, about some stranger in Pittsburgh driving it, probably not even knowing about Robert's sunglasses in the glove box. I thought about David, who hadn't called since last night, who was probably strategizing with Linda about what to do with his confused mother, who'd stolen his vehicle. And I thought about the folder of bank statements sitting on my kitchen table, about Patricia Chen shaking my hand, about the pearl earrings still in my ears. Then I walked home, and I waited. David showed up on Thursday afternoon. I saw his car, Linda's car actually, a silver sedan, pull into my driveway through my kitchen window. I watched him get out, walk up to my front door and try the handle. Locked. Of course it was locked. I'd locked it on Tuesday night and hadn't unlocked it since. He knocked 3 times, polite, patient. I stayed where I was, at my kitchen table with my cup of tea and my crossword puzzle. He knocked again, harder. Mum, I know you're in there. Your car's in the garage. We need to talk. His car. He'd said your car, meaning the SUV. Still thinking of it as his, even though it had been sitting in my garage for 3 days now. Still thinking of my house as a place he could just walk into. I did the crossword. 7 across, overdue account, arrears, 14 down, assert one's authority, demand. The knocking stopped. I heard his footsteps on the porch, then around the side of the house. He was checking the windows, then the back door. Locked. All of them locked, had been for 3 days, ever since I'd come back from the diner and realized that a house I'd lived in for 32 years had been more accessible to my son than to myself. His phone rang. I could hear it through the window. That generic ringtone he'd never bothered to change. Probably Linda, asking if I'd let him in yet, if I was being reasonable. I finished my tea, started a new crossword. Eventually, he gave up. I watched him get back in the sedan, sit there for a full minute staring at my house, then drive away. The phone rang 20 minutes later. Not David this time, Rachel. I almost didn't answer. Then I thought about the fact that Rachel had never once asked me for money, had never let herself into my house without knocking, had never sold any of my possessions and told me it was for my own good. I picked up. Grandma. Hello, sweetheart. There was a pause. I could hear something in the background. Traffic, maybe. She was calling from outside. Are you okay? Dad's been calling me like constantly. He says you stole his car. Interesting choice of verb. Stole. As though taking something that belonged to me, my space, my decisions, my life, was theft. I borrowed it, I said. He sold mine without asking. Seemed fair. Rachel laughed. Short, surprised, the kind of laugh that escapes before you can stop it. Oh my God, really? Really? Another pause, longer. I heard her move somewhere quieter, the background noise fading. Grandma, I need to tell you something about Dad. She hesitated. About the car. I waited. He didn't sell it because he was worried about you driving. I mean, maybe that was part of it, but that's not why. He needed the money. There are some debts from his business, bad investments or something. Mum doesn't even know the full extent. Something in my chest went very still. He sold your car to cover debt. Yeah, and I think he's been using money from your accounts too. I saw some statements on his desk last month when I was home. I didn't understand them then, but now, the $80,000, all those emergencies and opportunities and temporary expenses. Grandma, I'm so sorry. I should have said something sooner. I just didn't realize it's not your responsibility to police your father's behavior, I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected. But thank you for telling me. What are you going to do? Good question. What was I going to do? I looked around my kitchen, at the folder of bank statements still on my table, at the list of things that were mine, at the empty hook by the door where my car keys used to hang. I'm going to get my house in order, I said, starting with my will. Your will? Rachel's voice went up slightly. Is everything okay? Are you sick? I'm fine. Healthier than I've been in years, actually. And that was true. I'd slept through the night for 3 days straight. My back didn't hurt. The tight feeling in my chest had loosened. But I'm 74, and I've been putting off updating things since your grandfather died. Time to fix that. Another pause. Then, Grandma, if you need someone to... if you need help with anything, or someone to talk to, or... She trailed off, and I could hear in her voice that she was trying to figure out what you say to your grandmother when you've just revealed that your father has been financially exploiting her for years. I know, sweetheart, and I appreciate it, but I'm handling it. Okay. She didn't sound entirely convinced. But call me? Like, actually call me? Even just to talk? I will. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, looking at my phone. Rachel had said Linda didn't know the full extent of David's debts, which meant Linda knew something, which meant the decision to sell my car, to manage my life, to treat me like I was incompetent, that had been a joint decision, made together, probably over dinner at their house while I sat at home eating frozen meals because it's easier. The anger that rose up was different from what I'd felt on Tuesday. Tuesday had been sharp, reactive, the hot flash of someone pushed too far. This was cooler, more calculated. This was the anger that builds when you add up years of small betrayals and realize they weren't small at all. I opened my laptop, the one David had set up for me with parental controls, like I was a child who needed to be protected from the internet, and I logged into my accounts. The ones that only had my name on them now. Patricia had been thorough. Every account showed the change. Joint ownership reverted to individual. David's name removed cleanly, completely, like a surgical excision. I made a list. Not of what was mine this time, but of what I'd given. Every payment, every temporary expense, every time I'd said yes because it was easier than saying no. I used the bank records, cross-referenced them with my own checkbook register. I went back 7 years to when Robert had died and David had started helping. The total came to $104,000. $104,000. I printed the list, all 6 pages of it, put it in a folder, labelled it clearly. Payments to David Morrison, 2018-2025. Then I wrote another letter. Dear David, I've removed your name from my bank accounts. You'll receive official notification from the bank within a few days. This decision is final. I've also made an appointment with Harold Morrison to update my will. You are no longer designated as executor of my estate. When you're ready to have an adult conversation about our relationship, double one where you don't make decisions about my property without my permission, you may call me. Until then, I need space. Your SUV is in my garage. You may retrieve it at your convenience. Please call first. Mum. I read it over 3 times, printed it, signed it, put it in an envelope. Then I drove to the post office in the SUV because my car was gone and this was what I had, and I mailed it. The woman at the counter, someone I'd known vaguely for years, gave the SUV a long look when I pulled into the parking lot. New car, Helen? Temporary, I said. I didn't explain further. I was done explaining. Harold Morrison's office hadn't changed in 40 years. Same dark wood panelling, same leather chairs that creaked when you sat in them, same smell of old books and furniture polish. Robert used to joke that Harold was the only lawyer in Pennsylvania who still used a Rolodex, but the Rolodex was gone now, replaced by a computer that looked too modern for the rest of the room. Harold himself looked older. He'd been Robert's age, which meant he was 82 now, still working 3 days a week, because what else would I do? His handshake was firm, his eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. Helen, good to see you. Got your letter? Said you wanted to make some changes? Substantial changes, I said. We sat down in the chairs that creaked. Harold pulled out a file, my file, I realized, with my name on the tab, containing 40 years of legal documents, wills, the deed to the house, Robert's estate papers. Tell me what you're thinking, I told him. About David selling my car, about the bank accounts, about the $104,000 over 7 years, about removing David as executor and wanting to name Rachel instead. Harold listened without interrupting, the way good lawyers do. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, tapping his pen against his notepad. "That's quite a lot," he said finally. "Can I ask you some questions?" "Of course." "Are you angry right now?" "Yes." "Are you making these changes because you're angry or because they're what you actually want?" I thought about that, really thought about it, because it was a fair question. Was this revenge? Was I lashing out at David because he'd hurt me, trying to hurt him back? "Both," I said. "I'm angry. But I would want these changes even if I weren't. David has demonstrated that he doesn't respect my autonomy or my judgment. I don't trust him to execute my wishes after I'm gone." Harold nodded. "Rachel is 22? 23. She'll be 24 in February. She's in school?" "Graduate school. Psychology program at Penn State." "Does she know you're planning to name her?" "Not yet." Harold made a note. "I'll need to speak with her, make sure she's willing to take on the responsibility. Being executor isn't just an honor, it's work. Paperwork, decisions, family politics." Family politics, that was one way to describe what was coming. "She'll say yes," I said. "Rachel is... she's thoughtful. She cares about doing things properly." "Like her grandmother," Harold said, with a small smile. "Then, what about the rest of the estate? You're changing the executor, but are you changing the distribution?" Another good question. Robert and I had left everything to David, with provisions for Rachel if something happened to David, standard arrangement for an only child, but that was before I'd understood that David saw me as an ATM with a heartbeat. "I want to leave David the minimum required by law," I said. "Everything else goes to Rachel, in a trust until she's 30. Can we do that?" Harold's pen stopped moving. "We can." "But Helen, I need to make sure you understand what you're doing. If you cut David out substantially, and that's what this would be, he could contest the will, claim undue influence, diminished capacity, that sort of thing." "Let him try," I said. The words came out harder than I'd intended. "I'm 74, Harold, not senile. My doctor will testify to that. Patricia Chen at the bank will testify I was perfectly lucid when I removed David from my accounts. You're documenting this conversation, presumably noting that I understand exactly what I'm doing and why." "I am," Harold said, "but it's my job to make sure you've considered all the angles. David is your son. He'll be hurt by this." "David hurt me first," I said. "For 7 years. And he did it while pretending to care about my well-being." Harold looked at me for a long moment. Then he closed the file. "All right, I'll draw up the new will. I'll include a clause specifically stating that you're of sound mind, that you haven't been coerced or unduly influenced, and that you're making these changes deliberately after careful consideration. I'll also include your reasons, not all the details, but enough to show this wasn't a whim. How long will it take?" 2 weeks, maybe 3. I'll call you when it's ready for signing. You'll need 2 witnesses who aren't beneficiaries. I can arrange that." We shook hands. I was halfway to the door when Harold spoke again. "Helen, Robert would be proud of you, for what it's worth." I turned back. Harold was standing behind his desk, holding my file, looking at me with something that might have been respect or might have been sadness. "Robert let David walk all over him too," I said. "Loved him, yes, was proud of him, certainly, but didn't know how to tell him no." "True," Harold said, "but he knew how to pick a wife who would." I drove home in the SUV, and when I pulled into my driveway, David's sedan was there. He was sitting on my front porch, had been sitting there for who knows how long, waiting. I parked in the garage, closed the door, took a breath, then I walked out through the side entrance and around to the front of the house. David stood up when he saw me. He looked terrible, unshaven, rumpled, his expensive jacket creased like he'd slept in it. "Mom, finally, we need to talk." "I agree," I said, "but not inside. Here is fine." "Here? On the porch?" "Here on the porch." He looked at me like I'd suggested we conduct the conversation in Chinese. Then his expression shifted, became the one he used when he was trying to be patient with someone unreasonable. "Mum, I know you're upset." "I'm not upset, David. I'm finished." That stopped him. Finished with what? Finished being managed. Finished being treated like I'm incompetent. Finished with you making decisions about my property, my money, my life, without my permission. I sold the car because you're not safe driving. You sold the car because you needed money. Rachel told me about your debts. His face went white, then red. Rachel had no right. Rachel had every right. She's honest, unlike her father. The words hung in the air between us like thrown stones. David looked at me like I'd slapped him. "That's not fair. I was trying to help you. The business had a rough quarter, yes, but that's not why I sold the car." "You were getting confused?" "I was never confused." "You needed me to be confused. It made things easier." "Mum, don't." I held up my hand. "I've made a list, David, of everything I've given you in the last 7 years. Money, time, access to my home, my accounts, my decisions. It totals $104,000. Did you know that?" He opened his mouth, closed it. "You can't. That's not all. Some of that was for Rachel's tuition. $3,000 was for Rachel's tuition." I checked with her. "The rest was for you. Your investments, your emergencies, your life. I was going to pay you back. When? When you sold my car? When you sold my house?" "I wasn't going to sell your house, weren't you?" I looked at him, really looked at him. At the expensive jacket and the luxury car, and the way he'd stopped visiting unless he needed something, stopped calling unless it was to tell me what I should or shouldn't do. What was the plan, David? Wait until I was in a nursing home, until I was too confused to protest? You're being paranoid. I'm being realistic. For the first time in 8 years, I'm seeing clearly. The air between us was thick with things we'd never said. Years of resentment on both sides, building up like sediment. I don't know what Rachel told you, David said finally, but she doesn't understand business. The investment losses were temporary, I was managing them, and yes, I used some money from your accounts, but I had permission, you had access. Not permission. There's a difference. You're twisting things. I've removed your name from my accounts. That landed like a physical blow. David actually took a step back. You what? I went to the bank on Wednesday, removed you from all my accounts. Patricia Chen helped me. It's done. You can't do that without. Without what? Your permission? David, they're my accounts. I'm your son. Yes, and I'm your mother. Not your bank, not your employee, not your property. We stared at each other. 8 years of Robert's death between us, and all the ways we'd failed each other in that time, all the ways I'd let him take and take because saying no felt like betrayal, felt like I was rejecting the last piece of Robert I had left. But David wasn't Robert. Robert had been kind, patient. Robert had asked before he took. I've changed my will, I said, quieter now. You're no longer executor. Rachel is. Something in David's face cracked. You're giving everything to Rachel? I'm giving Rachel the responsibility of managing the estate. Most of the assets will go to her as well, in a trust. You'll receive what the law requires me to leave you, nothing more. Because of the car? Because of one mistake? Because of 7 years of mistakes. Because you've demonstrated that you don't see me as a person with agency and rights. Because I don't trust you. The words hung there. David's hands were shaking. His voice when he spoke was raw. I'm your son. After everything I've done for you, what have you done for me, David? The question came out genuinely curious. In the last 7 years, what have you actually done? You managed my finances by spending my money. You helped me by making decisions I didn't ask you to make. You protected me by selling my car without my permission. I visit, I call, you check on me, like I'm a task on a list. When's the last time you asked how I was feeling, what I wanted? When's the last time you took me somewhere because I wanted to go, not because you thought I should? Silence. That's what I thought, I said. David looked at me, and I saw the exact moment when he decided this conversation wasn't worth having, when he shifted from trying to convince me to trying to salvage what he could. Fine, he said, if that's what you want. But I need my car back. It's in the garage. I'll have it towed to your house next week. Next week? I need it now, and I needed my car last Tuesday. I guess we're both learning about patience. His jaw clenched. You're being petty. I'm being clear. The SUV will be returned to you in good condition, on my timelines. David looked at me like he was seeing a stranger. Maybe he was. Maybe I'd been a stranger to myself for so long that being seen clearly felt like transformation. I'll tell Linda about this, he said. She'll be disappointed that her emergency wallet is closed. I'm sure she will be. He flinched. When you're ready to have an actual relationship, I said, one where you respect my boundaries and my autonomy, you can call me. Until then, I need space. Real space. No showing up unannounced, no using your key. I'm changing the locks this weekend.
You're changing the locks.
Yes. Mum, that's my decision. My house, my locks. We stood there on my porch, two people who shared blood and history and a grief we'd never properly processed. But I wasn't going to process it with someone who saw my grief as opportunity. David turned to leave, then stopped. I did love Dad, you know. Everything I've done, I thought I was helping. I thought you needed me to... I needed you to love me, I said, not manage me. There's a difference. He left, got in the silver sedan, pulled out of my driveway, drove away. I stood on my porch for a long time after he was gone, listening to the silence. It didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like mine. Rachel came over on Saturday. I made lunch, chicken salad with grapes and almonds, the way she liked it, and we sat at my kitchen table and talked about everything. The will, the money, what it meant that her father had been using me as a financial backstop for years. She cried. I didn't, not anymore. I'd done my crying earlier in the week, quietly, alone, mourning something I hadn't fully realized I'd lost until I started getting it back. He's my dad, Rachel said. I love him. But Grandma, what he did to you... What he did was human, I said. Selfish? Yes. Wrong? Definitely. But human. He saw an opportunity and he took it. People do that. That doesn't make it okay. No, but it makes it understandable. And understanding it means I can let it go. We talked about the executor role. She was nervous about it, about the responsibility, about what it would mean for her relationship with her father. I told her the truth, that it would be hard, that David would be angry, that she had every right to say no. She said yes anyway. After she left, I called the towing company. The SUV was picked up on Monday morning, delivered to David's driveway while he was at work. I didn't leave a note, didn't need to. The check arrived on Wednesday, $4,000 made out to me, with a memo line that said, for the car. I looked at it for a long time. $4,000 for a car worth at least $8,000. $4,000 that was supposed to make everything right. I tore it in half, then in quarters, then into pieces so small they looked like confetti. I threw them away. The garage felt empty without a car in it, too empty. So on Thursday I cleaned it, really cleaned it the way Robert and I used to do every spring. I sorted through boxes of old tools, Robert's fishing equipment, the Christmas decorations we hadn't used in years. I kept what mattered, donated the rest. By the time I finished, the space felt different. Not empty, open. I stood there in my clean garage, in my house with new locks that David didn't have keys to, and I thought about what Harold had said, that Robert would be proud. Maybe he would be. Or maybe Robert would have wanted me to forgive David, to let it go, to keep the family together at any cost. Robert had been like that, conflict-averse, always smoothing things over, always choosing peace. But Robert was gone, and I was still here. I thought about all the women my age who'd told me similar stories over the years, whose children had taken over their finances for their own good. who'd moved in with family and lost themselves, who'd been managed and monitored and made invisible, told it was love when it was really control. If you're reading this and you recognize yourself, the one who always says yes, the one who smooths things over, the one who makes yourself smaller so others can be comfortable, I want you to know something. Your silence isn't kindness, it's abandoning yourself. Your boundaries aren't selfishness, they're survival. You don't owe anyone access to your life just because you share blood. You don't owe anyone your peace. You don't owe anyone the right to make you disappear. The late afternoon sun came through the garage door, stretching long across the concrete floor. Empty space where my car used to be. Empty space where David's SUV had been parked for a week. Empty space that was mine to fill or not fill as I chose. I walked back into my house, into my kitchen, and I made myself a cup of tea. I sat down at my table. I opened my book, the one I'd been meaning to read for months, the one David had said was too depressing when he'd seen it, and I read. Outside, the world kept turning. Inside, I was exactly where I needed to be, finally.